Welcome to the next episode of Conversations with Yogis podcast. I'm here with Melinda, of course, and today we've brought on our guest, Zeena Kalisperides, and I hope I said that right, Zeena. Zeena, I know from practicing Ashtanga with in London, and she is a Ashtanga teacher, runs the Mysore program in London, and also facilitates yoga teacher training programs. So we've brought her on the show today to talk about these topics. So welcome, Zeena. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Ashley and Melinda. Lovely to see you today, Ashley, and also Melinda to meet you. And thank you for having me on your lovely podcast. I think you've done a great job and great attempt at pronouncing that rather long, convoluted surname that I inherited through marriage. Yes, I live in London. My name's Zeena. I've been practicing yoga for a very long time now, in many guises, which we can explore. But I also, yes, I've been teaching for the last 10 years, if not a bit more than that, nearly 13 years in London. And I run a little Mysore program in West London in Acton. Just a lovely little soul family group of people that come together, really much focused on householder practice. Really, there's the people that need to come in, do their practice, and then head straight off to work or family. So it's a very sweet little space, and feel very lucky to be able to hold that space for some people. And yeah, teacher trainings have been a more recent part of my pathway over the last 4 years. Again, another interesting story that started in lockdown. When the world came to a standpoint, we decided to launch a teacher training, as you do.
Yeah.
And also morphed into some more energy-based work as well in the last year. So that's sort of my sort of offerings in London.
Cool. And you used to be a dentist, right?
Yeah, I was working as a dentist in the NHS for about 10 years. I also have a degree in biochemistry, so similar background to you, I think, Ashley.
Yep, fellow science nerd. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, that was always something that I was drawn to from a very early age. The human body, how it works, its mechanics, just something I would think I was born to do and study. And it's something that I will always study. I think it's just something that really sparks me in terms of having an interest that's really natural. It's not forced or effortful, unlike things like, I don't know, maths or accounting for me would be a bit more forced.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that started off my journey with the human body, learning biochemistry and studying dentistry. But then yoga was always part of that. There was always a thread, almost like a sutra, like threaded throughout my whole life. This yogic sort of energy was in the background. It first started when my mum used to practice Shivananda yoga. So I would see her as a child doing her practice. But after leaving, my parents come from Mauritius. After they left Mauritius, it wasn't so easy for her to access classes here in London at that time, especially Shivananda. So she was just doing some stuff at home. And I think that after a while just fell by the wayside. She, work, mother commitments, life commitments took over. But I distinctively remember her in shoulder stand, in Samba Shavasana, and thinking that just looked awesome, that this person was standing on their shoulders. It's just complete, as inversions do, give us a completely different way of looking at life. So I remember, throwing my legs up in the air at 5 or 6 and trying to copy her. And then halasana as well, and doing halasana, and thinking all of that was just fun. And as a child, I guess that's what we see these shapes as, just these great ways of exploring ourselves. And as adults, we forget that. We forget how to explore, don't we? Society asks us to forget how to explore. So for me as a child, that was really interesting. And then, that sort of stayed with me, I guess, but not so much as an asana practice, but just as this shape forming, being creative with the body. But nothing really stuck in the same way asana did until I turned, I think it was about 15 at school, a school teacher on a Wednesday afternoon in London. I think in the UK we have these afternoons on a Wednesday where we have sort of extracurricular classes. And this one term, the teacher decided to teach yoga. And it was sun salutation A and B. We were in our kilts and our blazers. I probably took my blazer off, but I was still in my kilt, doing sun salutation A and B and thinking, well, this feels really familiar. This feels really connected and comforting. Comforting was a word that, I felt like home in those movements. And so from then on, it just really sparked a real interest again in asana. And I think by the time I got to about 19, I was then in a committed 3, 4, 5 times a week sort of practice of going to find different classes from vinyasa and hatha, all sorts of classes I was going to, but mainly hatha. And then it became just a daily practice, even if it was just sun salutations in the morning. I was always practicing some form of asana throughout my day.
Nice. And what brought you to Ashtanga?
So, yeah, Ashtanga was a bit of a convoluted journey. Started off very much based in fear. Seeing those Ashtangis when I was going to places like Trayoga, which is one of the first big centers I started practicing at, and seeing what they were doing, like peering through the window and thinking, that is insane. I couldn't possibly do that. And literally, I remember being scared of the teachers as they were coming out of the room, But my teacher, even though she was teaching Hatha, she was actually teaching pretty much based from the primary, intermediate, and some of the third series. So she was mixing it up, but not calling it Ashtanga. Obviously, we were in a gym hall or a church hall, depending on which day she was teaching. And at some point, she gave me David Swenson's book. And she says, I can't teach you anymore. I cannot teach you anymore. You need to go and learn from this teacher. And at that time, I was just finishing biochemistry, but very much with an aim to go and start dentistry. And so my head is thinking, I can't waste time going to learn Ashtanga. I'm going to go off and become a dentist. But that always stuck with me in the back of my head, that this practice was something that I needed to go and look for, because I trusted my teacher implicitly. She was just a beautiful soul. She passed away in 2010. And so, but at the time, she was just the most influential soul that I'd ever come across, and really supportive. So her wisdom there had really stuck with me. And as I started practicing dentistry or learning dentistry, I started finding myself, and after she passed away, I thought, well, this is probably where I need to start doing what she's told me to do. So I started looking into Ashtanga practices and classes. So I think by the time I was 24, 25, I was practicing lead classes mainly. I was going to maybe 3 lead classes a week, which I think for me was really useful because I didn't have natural strength, especially not in the upper body. So having that weekly class that built up to 2 weekly, then 3 weekly classes a week really helped to build that confidence there. And I think that's probably quite true for anyone coming to Ashtanga, unless you have a really strong physique naturally. It can be quite daunting and maybe a little bit tiring to just start whacking out 6-day a week practice. We don't, for the body as well as for the nervous system, we don't really encourage students to just go full on the 6 days. So yeah, that really helped, and really helped through my dentistry course as well, because I would be able to get up every morning, do my sun salutations, do some standing, and it would set me up for the whole day. I remember even revising for finals, when you do those all-nighters and you're staying up all night, cramming in as much as you can, information. I remember one night we'd done as much as we could. My friends said, I'm going to go and get a couple of hours sleep. And I said, right, I'm just going to roll out my mat. I'm going to do some practice. She got some sleep. I did some practice, and we went to exam straight after. And that was the end of dentistry after 5 years. So it had always been there. It had always been part. It was like a little friend, just constantly guiding, holding hands, saying, when you're ready, I'm here. I think for me, that natural sort of organic transformation from just, playing with asana to finding my way into Ashtanga, for me, was the most sort of beneficial route for me.
Well, sounds very like a natural flow, and you're so lucky that you were exposed to it when you were so young. Like I always think like if I had been exposed to yoga in university, how would that have influenced my like studying? And I partied a lot when I was in university, so maybe that would have grounded me a little bit more, and I didn't find it till I was 26. So that's amazing. And then it just carries you through university. Wow.
I partied a lot as well. I was lucky enough to do 2 degrees. So my first degree was full on campus life and partying and doing lots of substances that were really quite fun. And so by the time I got to dentistry, I was okay with not going out.
Yeah.
Because not that I didn't have a social life, but I was okay with saying, and I was also a good 3 or 4 years older than the students that were coming straight from A level. I was okay with saying, I'm going to yoga in the morning, so I'm not going to come out tonight, or I'm going home at this time. But also what really, I think, kept the interest going was I remember one time in Manchester with my previous teacher, and it wasn't a full-on Ashtanga class. There wasn't a lot of heat going on there, but I remember sitting in Manchester and feeling like I was feeling euphoric, like as if I was on a substance that I shouldn't be on, and I was thinking, God, the body can do this. What else can it do? We don't need exogenous substances to have this feeling, and we can get this from yoga. So what is really going on with this? And I was probably about 22, 23 at that point. And I remember thinking, there's something really fascinating in this. I'm probably going to spend a lot more of my time. I didn't think it would be my whole life, but probably now a lot of my time trying to figure out what this is.
Mm.
And so, I was really lucky that I had a chance to do 2 degrees and live out degrees in both playful and serious ways, and have yoga, sort of fuel, be the fuel behind both of them. But when it came to my career then as a dentist, I really felt that yoga had a place in society that met the needs of people that medicine wasn't meeting. I think that was the catalyst for me leaving dentistry, was that I felt that yoga was something that had a capacity to help people in a way that modern medicine wasn't helping people. Over 10 years, you get to meet people, so many different people as a dentist, as a clinician. People come in for dental problems, but they really share so much of their everyday life with you. And you really get to see it, have an insight, a really unique insight into how people's lives are evolving across a demographic. And what I was seeing more than anything was people were living in so much pain, so much fear, states of discombobulation where, life was so stressful. They were chronically living in low-grade stress with nowhere really to, release all of that. They were just holding it, and it was manifesting in pain and disease, discomfort mentally, and that was showing up massively so in my clinics every day. And I just felt more and more that not that there isn't a place for modern medicine, but that there was a place for something else as well.
Mm-hmm. So how long did you practice dentistry before you made that transition into becoming a yoga teacher? And what actually prompted you to do like a yoga teacher training?
So I've been practicing I think I practiced in total for about 10 years in the NHS. But there's this funny thing where we had our end of year book made by one of the students in dentistry, and they said, "Where will you be in 10 years' time?" And I had put in there, I'd be teaching yoga, and I had no idea there was teacher trainings around. I had no idea, and whenever I read back on it now, I think, how did I say that? I always try and tune into what was it that made me say that, and I still don't remember. I don't know, and I put that down. So I think that was just always going to be a given, and that somehow that was going to happen. It was fated. But one of the things that really I loved practicing, I was running out the door, 5 o'clock on the dot. I was starting to run out the door as soon as I did my notes, and I was out the door after class or before going to work class. It was the only thing I could think about, really. It started to take over my sort of priority as a dentist. But what I was feeling also whilst carrying out surgery is, especially in root canal treatments, I could feel this sense that what I was doing wasn't right. Not that root canals are wrong or there's anything wrong with them, but that my hands were meant for something else. Yeah. And that I couldn't, the energetic feeling of that was getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And I really enjoy doing root canals, and root canals are actually quite hard to do unless you have like private instruments, the instruments that you get in private practice. But I was, really interested in doing neurological surgery. So that was, for me, that was really a great part of my dental work. But yet still this message was coming through. This just wasn't right. So, I think by that point, I was regularly practicing at Tri Yoga, and I liked the idea that their teacher training at that time was a 2-year program. I think by that point, I'd been, immersed enough into the different lineages of yoga to know that you have to be a good student first before you become a teacher. So to have a course that was 2 years long, I think it just spoke volumes to its sort of integrity, to maintaining that element that you need to be a really good student first, and that it gave good support to the people that were doing the course. So I enrolled on that in 2011, and it took 2 years to complete. And it was a fascinating course because I was the two main teachers were Anna Ashby, who's an sort of alignment Iyengar-based restorative teacher and the teacher, and Joey Miles, who's a very much staunch Ashtanga teacher, but with a really strong background in Iyengar as well. And so the underlying teachings were Iyengar and Ashtanga. So I feel like I got the best of both worlds over those 2 years.
Yeah, it's quite good to have teacher training that's like 2 years, because you need the discipline to stick with it, stay with it. You have time to digest it. Because I think the biggest problem is now, like, oh, let's have a 200-hour course, like 28 days, as quick as you can. And then I go for another 100 hours, and like, oh, I've done thousands of hours of teacher training. And when did it sink in? Like, when did it actually... So I think it's good when you can study for longer. My first 200 hours was 3 months, and it was quite different for the other 30 days one. So I was like, this is actually, I need this because I have no idea what's happening and need to digest it. And I think it's a very good part of a course if it's long.
Yeah, mine was 28 days, and like I had been practicing yoga for a couple of years before I took it, but when you learn that amount of information that just like opens your mind and changes your whole perspective on things, like you need time to marinate in it and digest it and put it into practice before you start teaching it. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, I'm a qualified yoga teacher, how does that work? Like yeah,
I think that's one of the great things about teacher trainings, is that people learn to become students, or learn the importance of becoming a student if they haven't done so already. By the time they get to the teacher training, so they suddenly realize there's so much more to yoga than asana, or a little bit of alternate nostril breathing, or lion's breath if they've been exposed to that much. So I think me, as someone who's held spaces for teacher trainings, that's one of the most important messages, which is to get out that, how important it is to be a student, first and foremost, and then secondly, how vast the lineage is, how vast the teachings are beyond asana. And so for me, the teacher training of 2 years was just incredible. We were able to exactly digest, integrate the teachings, the philosophy, the energetics within ourselves in a form of experimentation. We had time to play and experiment with it rather than just learn that this is it and that's it. So we could learn to experiment with it, the techniques on ourselves to see how it worked at different times of day or with different people. And then also we had so much time to practice in group together, which again creates that sense of sangha, that sense of community. But then also to practice teach as well. So I feel like we had the first year of really learning how to be good students. And the second year of being introduced to what it looks like maybe to teach. And then by the end of it, I think we're all really great students, but not necessarily, this is like you've got your L plates or your P plates now when you pass your driving test. And now you can go and learn really to drive.
True. And I like the idea of that. It's kind of like against of nowadays fast-paced world, that there's so many teacher trainings, there's so many options, and like so many teacher trainings also like promises you so much that you can learn so much. I think I've seen one that you learn hatha yoga, vinyasa yoga, yin yoga, restorative. Like whoa, 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 whoa. So I think it's so overwhelming to see some teacher trainings nowadays. So having those ones that are long and very specified in one thing as well is that's what we need, because we don't want to just learn a script of how to teach yin yoga and be a yin yoga teacher. No, you kind of have to understand it a bit more than that.
So it comes up through you and out, like you've lived it.
Yeah. I think once you've embodied a practice like yoga, or you're at least on the, you're living your life through an embodied version of it, that shines through as a teacher. When you've learned a script, you're performing. And it's really easy to see when someone's performing. And to some extent, we all perform when we first start learning, right? We all start performing because that's the way we start to remember, to some extent, how to verbalize what we've hopefully embodied. But it's also easy to see when someone's just verbalizing something that they've learned from a script rather than with no embodiment whatsoever. And I've definitely, seen that through students that I've, come across on teacher trainings. But I think the humility that you also gain from going through 2 years of teacher training, helps to make for really compassionate teachers, I think. That's what I saw out of the cohort that I studied with and graduated with. There was a huge change from all of us. Pre-COVID, people would come to teacher trainings because they were either physically capable or they'd been practicing for a long time and therefore were, had some sort of level of physical ability to practice asana and wanted to deepen their understanding. And I think, that with that comes a level of sort of a concept of I know, and then when you go through a 2-year teacher training, you go, I don't know. I really didn't know as much as I thought I did. And that's really, humbling. And that was really beautiful to be part of that process, but also at the same time grow, which is, so powerful to be able to share that journey of growth with people. I think having done 2 degrees, one of them, both of them really long, nearly 9 years at university, I think that capacity for me to maintain that attention comes pretty easily. But I've also learned that for a lot of people, it doesn't come so easily. So maybe somewhere in between with the sort of maybe a 1-year teacher training or a 4-month teacher training is probably more accessible. It's also time-wise for a lot of people if they want to go and just deepen their practice rather than, actually becoming teachers themselves.
I think that's a very good point because what brings people to a teacher training, some people like to strive to learn more, to deepen their practice. Some people want to teach. Some people need change in their life, want to leave their work behind. So it's so many different things brings you to a teacher training. And in a way nowadays it's good to have so many options because hopefully it can fulfill all those needs. But most of the time, I find people choose a teacher training depending on when they have time. And they're lucky enough now that there's so many options that they can actually I'm free on these times, which is good, but also not really. So I think teacher training's changed so much in the last 8-10 years I have been teaching as well, which is mind-blowing. And it's good to have the options, but I think sometimes there's too much option and it can make you really confused. What are your thoughts about all this options of teacher training and seeing all this plethora of teacher trainings out there? How would someone choose teacher training?
I think when you're looking at how teachers became teachers, from the source, if we go back to Krishnamacharya, he spent 7 years in a cave with his teacher and had to ask, had to perform. I forget, off the top of my head what he had to do, but he had to show some level of aptitude and some level of commitment to that teacher before he was even acknowledged and accepted as a student, let alone, being qualified, suddenly becoming qualified as a teacher. And yes, in this day and age, we might consider that, and maybe not just this day and age, in our Western culture, we might consider that extreme. And inaccessible. We might use that word as well. But I think it's important to keep hold of that teaching, keep hold of that picture of Krishnamacharya and the story of his life and how he became really the man that's the reason that we have yoga in the West. what was his journey? If we listen to a lot of mentors or life coaches or business gurus, they'll say things like, find the people that are doing the things that you want to do and emulate what they did. And Krishnamacharya did what everyone here is trying to do, which is become good and great yoga teachers, if we're going to say that we're going to take a yoga teacher training course to become a teacher. So I think it's important we don't forget that lineage of student following their guru, whatever, if we use that term loosely for now. So I think it's really important that students feel that they are committed to the path of yoga first before even looking at what course they want to do to become teachers. But if you're looking to learn, you're thinking, I'm really enjoying this course, this path of yoga, it's really something I'd like to dig a little more into, because for sure, our studio classes, our 1 hour, 75-minute classes are not spaces where we should be able to, but they're not really spaces where we can really speak too much about the philosophy or the other sort of practices such as mantra or pranayama. So I would say look for a course where you have enough time to integrate. So 4 months I think is a good time. It's a quarter of a year, so it's pretty much a season. So you can go through a whole season of the year. I think it's really important to look at lunar cycles and seasons as sort of barometers for time. That's nature's clock. So I like to go and follow nature's clock. And then I would also look at how these teachers that are teaching you learn. Who is their teacher? Who have they learned from? Who do they honor in their bio? Who is it that they're paying homage to? How did they learn? Where did they learn? Did they commit to 1 or 2 teachers, or have they done exactly that? 200 hours here, 100 hours there, 50 hours here. I've done like a weekend course in Yoga Nidra. And then what are they teaching? Are they teaching in commitment to what their teachers have taught them, or are they just, or are they just grabbing lots of little things from lots of different teachers? Start having some discernment, practicing some discernment when you're making your decision. So when you look at the teachers that are teaching you, and what are you going to learn from them? What do they support, in terms of the yoga industry? Do they support fast-paced yoga lifestyle, or are they supporting, local communities, local sanghas? Are they building up their own community? Or are they just jumping from one place to another, to get a name for themselves? I think it's really important to have integrity, or the people that you learn from have some sort of level of integrity. In terms of the syllabus, I think you're right. If a syllabus is too heavily loaded with a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, whilst trying to sell it as you're going to be able to learn and teach all of this, then I think that, there's a little bit of a mismatch with what they're saying and what they're actually going to deliver. If they're saying we're going to introduce these concepts to you, so then you can go and explore them further later on, fine. I think it's important that a teacher training covers a breadth of what yoga is now, and it is vast, but also it should really dive deep. I think for me, one of the most important things is looking at the philosophy and the history of yoga, where its roots are, the culture from where it's rooted from. Again, coming back to that concept of Krishnamacharya and his life story, if we don't know where yoga comes from, if we don't know what it's rooted in and what was trying to be explored and experienced in the early times of yoga being developed, then what we'll essentially teach is stretch classes. That's all we're gonna see. More and more stretch classes labeled as yoga. And people will then dilute the teachings of yoga, and in 5, 10, 15, 20 years time, yoga will have lost its essence. In the West, at least, it will not lose its essence in its root country. That's not going to happen. It might get less obvious, but it won't lose it completely. So the history, the culture, and the philosophy is really important. And I think more and more now, especially in London, if a teacher training course doesn't have a module on diversity and inclusivity, then for me, that's a no-no. That's saying that you're not willing to look at the things that yoga is asking us to look at. Our shadows, And that is exactly what yoga is asking us to look at our shadows and integrate them. And if a course is not offering that, then I don't think it's worth the paper that it's written on. Yeah.
No, that's quite good. I think you cover a lot of things, because I think many people would like to think about, like, do teacher trainings, but it's just so confusing, and then they don't know what to look out for. So I think you covered all the bases that I completely agree with, and it's good to implement these into.
The other thing I'd also add, though, in terms of asana, I think I just assumed we're going to be covering asana in the teacher training course, but in terms of asana, I see so many students. When I first taught my first teacher training, it was just as lockdown was starting. We started our first teacher training, so we actually went from an in-person course to an online course. We thought, you know what, we're going to give it a go. I wouldn't, if you'd said that to, I was going to do that in 2019, I would have laughed and said, no way. There's just no way I would ever teach online, let alone try and run a teacher training online. But it was needed at that time. I used discernment to say, look, our community is not together. They need support. And this is one way that we keep the community together and build community at a time when, division is what was being, sort of imparted into a society. So what we found was, post-COVID, when we were running the teacher trainings, is that students were coming to us only having learned yoga through online classes.
Mm.
And what I found that they had no awareness of was alignment, whether that was physical or let alone energetic alignment cues or understanding of alignment at all. And even though we don't really, we focus on it in the Mysore. I definitely focus on it a lot in the Mysore room that I teach in. But I know Ashtanga isn't so focused on physical alignment, but there is still some cues there if you listen carefully to the alignment. There is some, but Iyengar as well, is such an important part of the yoga world that without physical alignment cues, even in vinyasa classes, I know we have to find a way to do that so the flow isn't so disrupted. But without that, we don't have the sort of the boundaries for people to start to play within. We don't have the lines that we can start coloring within. Mm. And I think a lot of teacher trainings I've seen now are like, I'm going to teach you a vinyasa sequence, and you're going to have this little script to go out and teach the sequence. But the students don't know what they're teaching in terms of basic foundational elements of asana. So I think it's really important to have that basic foundation through physical alignment cues in any, yoga course.
So like when you were teaching them in teacher training programs after coming out of COVID and only practicing there, like you were starting from like teaching Trikonasana, for example, like where to put your arm and your feet.
Yeah, look, teaching, people were starting to say, well, all I want to do, they had the impression that teaching yoga was just saying a name and that the student in front of them would just do it. And I think also, to some extent, and this is where I have a little issue now, I think with Ashtanga classes, in studios being called led classes, which they are the led classes, but really we also have to try and guide students through that. But if we do a true led class, there's no instruction, right? Because it's assumed that you've already learnt your instruction in a Mysore. That's the true, in a Mysore setting, which is the true led style. But actually we're calling it led style, but really trying to guide students through. So therefore we're trying to bring in alignment cues to teach them. But a lot of people will come to a class and just hear the count and just hear the name and think, oh, that's all it takes to become an Ashtanga teacher, right? You just need to know the name of the posture and the count. Or for a vinyasa teacher, just going from one asana to the next. And that's all you need to know. But really you need to know how to break down an asana, right? You need to know how to teach it from the ground up or teach other elements outside of that asana to get them to understand how to embody that asana from the different parts. And it's all those little nuances that I think students were coming to because they were going to classes that didn't have any alignment cues whatsoever and weren't being taught how to break down a posture and weren't being taught personally either. That's the other thing. How do you look at the person in front of you and teach them rather than take the teachings that you have and try and impose it on them? Mm. So learning those cues, I think, are so important because if you have a toolbox, then you can pick which tool is needed for that situation rather than just having one tool and trying to, think, okay, I've got a hammer, so everything I see in front of me is a nail, right? So I'm just gonna hammer that in, and hope that it works.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, like, I'm lucky I came from a background of like strict alignment, so I am teaching that to my students. But I do get a little bit concerned when it's not being taught at all. And I see that. So
Also,
sorry, go ahead.
No, it's like sometimes you plan a class for to anyone, like to a group of people, and then you go there and then you start teaching it, and you're like, oh, this is not going to work because we need to adjust it. They need more help with, again, alignment. Oh, they don't need help with alignment. They need to get harder pushes. Like, I think a class is always, every time you teach, you have to, I would adjust my classes of what I see in front of me, because I was like, okay, this is actually not going to work today, what I completely planned. So you just stay on top of what I've planned, but also like adjust it to the people that are in front of me. And I think that's why you need a toolbox. So I think it's very true of knowing, like having all the toolbox and then use what you can or what you need on the day.
Yeah, for sure. Even in a lead class, because the way studios market these classes is that they're an open class in Ashtanga, for example. They're complete beginners thinking that it's okay, it's going to be okay for them. And, for me, I'm happy to have someone who's never walked into a yoga class ever walk into a lead class with me, because I expect, and that rightly or wrongly, my sort of more senior students in the class to have the capacity to be kind and caring to those that are coming to start. And if you're coming to an Ashtanga class and you've been practicing for years and years and years, I would hope that your Ashtanga has taught you enough compassion for yourself that you can expand that out to others. That you remember what it was like to be a beginner, and that every time we come to our mat, even if you're doing the same posture for, I don't know, the 100th time or the first time, how can you look at it with fresh eyes? So if my classes have to go, like you say, if you've got a class full of seasoned practitioners that know the practice inside out, you can really flow, right? You can really get deep into that sense of breath, going beyond the asana, the shape and the form. If you've got a room that's 3/4 newbies, no, we're going completely back to basics. And maybe the seasoned practitioner needs that day. Maybe they need it that day too. We all need days like that, right? We all need days where it's just really foundational, grounding, centering, and that's what we need, because that's what life in our life, that's what we need.
Yeah, you can get caught up in like practicing really fast and just zipping through it, and then sometimes if you're there for a little bit more, you reconnect to that grounding aspect that you can find, the softness in the posture that sometimes I even have to hold myself or tell myself every once in a while, like, okay, you're moving too fast. Like, where is the breath in this posture? Where can you get to? What are you actually doing in this posture, instead of just moving through it and getting it done?
100%. And I really learned to love that. I probably say I lean into that probably a little too much for maybe for my teacher's liking sometimes.
Oh, me too.
I remember one time my teacher, I've been going to a lady in Australia called Eileen Hall for a few times now, as for a long time practice, like for a month or 2 months at a time. I remember at one point, she's just looking, she said, are we sleeping here today, Zeena? Are we going to have a rest? Are we having a nap? I was like, no, I'm just breathing through. Because Ashtanga, requires that sense of, the count, which was traditionally 8 breath count, in my defense. But we moved to a 5 breath count to get people through. And I remember being taught 8 breaths when I first started to learn. And I think that makes a huge difference. And I teach my students that, stay, especially in asanas they're new to. If it's easy in, but they're not quite understanding it, 8 breaths. Or if you need a slower practice, 8 breaths. If the nervous system's getting jacked up, 8 breaths, not 5 breaths.
Yeah.
Well, nice.
Yeah, spend longer in the ones that feel more resistant or are newer too. Yeah. It's the beauty about practicing Mysore is that I'm working through a lot of new postures now too, and it's like I'm actually going to stay here for 20 breaths right now because I need my body and my nervous system to understand that this is an okay place to be and just explore it instead of running away from it and moving on.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more. And also come back down to that breaking it down. How can we, turn that one challenging posture into little micro postures, little micro asanas that we can build up, because that's how we build up tolerance in the nervous system. We actually freak it out if we, take it into sympathetic drive, if we just keep loading it with the same fear loading, fear loading, fear loading. Instead, we need to be able to break it down and say, okay, well, this is a part that we can work on, build someone's confidence, and then introduce that part to the asana, and then introduce another part. So it always comes, for me anyway, when learning a posture or teaching a posture, an asana, if a student doesn't get it, I'm thinking, okay, well, where is it? I'm looking, where is it in their body that the energy isn't moving through? How can I help them access that space? How can they access that space so they feel that sense of awe? That's what we're looking for, that sense of awe when we're finding something new in the body.
Yeah. That like kind of gets me thinking about what you're practicing now, or what you just did training in spinal energetics, because you've been putting some crazy videos on Instagram and I just find it so interesting. Like, it's fascinating. I don't even really know much about it. I never heard about it until I saw you posting about it, to be quite honest.
You need to come for a session.
I would love to. Can you explain what it is to us and what you do to people and how it helps them? Like, why they would go to work on
like
spinal
a witch,
energetics?
what I do to people. Sure. I mean, spinal has been something that's come into my life this year, on a physical level. I think I probably discovered it just like you on Instagram, but about a year ago, I would say about October, November of 2023. I started seeing the videos being posted on the Spinal Energetics page by its founder, Dr. Sarah Jane Perry. She's a chiropractor based in Melbourne. And I don't know how you felt when you saw the videos, Ashley, for the first time, but the first time I saw them, it just resonated the word truth to me. Like, this is it. This is what healing looks like. This is what freedom looks like. This is what liberation looks like. The thing that we talk about in Ashtanga and yoga, so moksha, liberation, samadhi, that to me, that resonated on the same level. And I didn't understand it, didn't know what it was. Just saw these people moving on a table, like a massage table. You just see them moving and almost some points shaking, convulsing almost, to the point of like, it looks like there's some sort of convulsion going on. And so I started watching and reading all the posts, and then just learning a lot about it as a modality. So Dr. Sarah, as I said, is a chiropractor. She also trained in something called network spinal, which is chiropractic, but with much more gentle touch. Rather than the manipulations that you often get that are associated with chiropractics. And it's based on the idea that the more, sometimes the body needs a much more gentle touch, and also to create shifts and changes, but also that we have an energetic field around us that can also be tapped into as a place where we've held experiences in life and our traumas, and that gets stored as tension. So as we experience things that in our life that I think it was in the book Waking the Tiger, the first sort of book on sort of modern day sort of teachings on trauma and how it's held in the body, the term outside our window of tolerance was coined. And so if an event happens outside our window of tolerance, we'll go into sort of fight or flight survival mode, instead of integrating and processing and integrating that experience. So we then tend to go into this sympathetic drive of getting things done and moving beyond that, but we don't actually integrate or process that experience. And in that moment, it gets stored somewhere in our body, either as a tension pattern on the physical body somewhere within the nervous system, or it gets stored somewhere within our energetic body. And we know that within the yogic practices, we have the koshas, we have the different energetic layers of our body. And so Dr. Sarah, who's spent a lot of time in India, trained a lot in, she's a yoga teacher as well. She's trained a lot in Vedic practices such as mantra and mudra, and embodies the chakra system within spinal energetics, has created this modality that's an energetic healing modality that really helps someone, client, the person that's on the bed, to come back into connection with their own innate wisdom. When we go through these experiences, we become a little bit disconnected from ourselves. A bit like when I first practiced asana at 15 properly, I remember thinking it was like coming home again. And between the age of 5 and 15, there had been a childhood trauma in my life that had probably caused me to disconnect. And the first time I practiced asana, I felt like I'd come home. This also helps us to remember what it's like to come home to ourselves in a more integrated way. So we access the client's spine and sort of touch the client's spine to begin with, just to see if what the body's telling us is going on. Where are their tension patterns? Where is their holding? Where is their tension? And those tension patterns can allow us to start to discern where in the body we're holding on to past experiences. And then we use the chakra system in alignment with different parts of our body, because our chakra system has alignments with different nerve plexuses and organs throughout the body. And we use those as points in the body to guide us through then the koshas, to access the different layers of koshas, to bring all this extra energy back into the person's field so that they can integrate and process and integrate those experiences that haven't been integrated. If we consider those experiences, if they've not been integrated or processed, as little apps running in the background, like on our phone. We have these apps running, they take up energy in the back of our, in our sort of program. And if we think about a computer, it's constantly taking up the energy or the battery bandwidth on our phone. When we can process them or close them down, integrate them, we then have a reserve of energy that comes on board that we can then use to be more present in our day-to-day life. And when we're more present, when that energy is completely focused in the present moment, we're more effective, we flow more, we have more energy to create. So that's what the whole process of spinal energetics is based on, this ability to connect back to the innate wisdom that keeps our heart beating, that keeps our hair growing, that heals wounds, that grows a baby in the womb. There's a wisdom there behind us that we don't tap into. That we take for granted that it's always going to be there until it's not, but that has a bandwidth of that we can tap into. And if we don't tap into it fully, that's when we start to see disconnection. And as we can see from the last 24 hours, disconnection on a societal level results in dis-ease. On an individual level, it can result in disease. So it's so important for us to draw that energy back from those parts of us that are disconnected and let them heal.
I love that. That sounds a lot like, while I did my naturopathic nutrition diploma, is bringing everything into alignment, bringing everything into communication in the body, the mind, the spirit. The prana is flowing to all the dark corners of the body that aren't talking or communicating effectively with other parts of yourself. And just like, well, how can we get the sense of flow back into that area of the body that's not functioning for some reason? So like for me, I'm working more with like organs, hormones, through food and lifestyle practices. But this is so interesting. Like, do people, so they lay on a massage table?
Yeah, you'd be laying flat on a massage table, and sound is something that's really integral to spinal energetics as well. So we have lots of music playing, and it's not necessarily relaxing. It can be quite, what we try to do is see what the client's body responds to that they like, but also a little bit we take them into sympathetic drive. So we go from sympathetic to parasympathetic, sympathetic to parasympathetic, so that we create an altered state, brainwave state. And in that altered brainwave state, we can disconnect from the program that we've become habituated to following. So say we've experienced something in our life that's caused us to go into fight or flight, that we know is like a big T trauma. If we don't process that or integrate it, little T traumas in life that that cause us to remember that big T trauma or feel it again, tap into those same feelings, will keep us in that state of fight or flight, even at a low level base. So even though we think we're functioning, we might be functioning, but we're not thriving. We're just going through life. As opposed to being, what this will do, will help us to move beyond that program that we become addicted to, essentially become attached to, and living from that space. And then in freeing ourselves, detaching ourselves from that program in that altered brainwave state, we can start to tap into what it feels like to go beyond life as someone who's experienced that trauma. We come back to our true self. We come back to our whole self. And we start to remember what it is to be whole, and feeling, and also shaking it off. Those shaking movements that you see are part of the process of releasing that or integrating that experience. If you see animals, not even in the wild, you just have to go to if you've got a dog, you walk your dog, and if you see two dogs go for each other, what do straight after? They shake it off. Mm-hmm. We don't do that. We go in our culture, those sorts of movements that you see. And this is one of the reasons people either love and look at spinal energetics and go, yes, that's 100%, yes for me. Or they go, absolutely no, this is batshit crazy, nuts, insane, total BS. This is rubbish. This is someone being paid to act on a table, because they have been conditioned so much to look at those movements, which are so innate to the human body and the human experience, as something that's animalistic and just so because they're disconnected from that level of experience of life. They feel that that's foreign to them,
like living from the neck up, and
completely.
It's like getting into your body with, people need to be open to yoga and moving through fascia in some respect to have changes that occur from the practice. Like otherwise it is just stretching your body and not really connecting to the deeper levels of where you can go with it. And then moving the prana, and then getting into meditation and those more subtle energies where you sit in stillness and you can process traumas that come up. Like, would you say that this can do like similar healing work that you would experience in deep meditation? Or is it different? Or
I think it's very similar. I think you touch on a really good point there, Ashley, with regards to asana and yoga, in terms of it being a practice that, when we think of yoga classes today in the West, we think of asana, for sure. I don't think people have, and then there's breathwork classes, and then there's, and again, we're doing exactly what medicine does, which is we're compartmentalizing everything, as opposed to having a whole yoga class, which is, I'm going to take you from, we're going to go from this to this to this to this. We're going to go from, sitting and focusing our breath, and then starting to move, and then going into meditation. We don't have that. And that is really where we should be going, that we see it as a whole practice. And spinal energetics, I think for me, my experience of it might sound controversial. It delivers everything that Ashtanga said it would, but probably doesn't. And I say it probably doesn't because we're not in India, away from work for 6 months or 12 months, a year, without, if you go and you live in an ashram or in the context of an ashram for 6 months or 12 months with heat, without having to work, just, you can go deep in your practice. You can go super, super deep. Anyone that's done it for 2 months, 3 months will know that you can do that. So imagine, back in the 70s and 80s when they were going for a year or, 6 months, and doing that for 10 years. I mean, that's incredible. That's an incredible opportunity to go deep. We don't necessarily have that ability, that space, or that time, or that money nowadays to be able to go and do that. But for me, spinal does that within, I wouldn't say a session. Oh God, if my Dr. Sarah says, if we could heal everyone in if everyone could heal everything within a session, that would be the best thing in the world. But B, probably, would probably blow our nervous systems to smithereens if we saw it all in one go. I would say within 3 sessions, you can really make huge life-changing changes in someone's ability to come back into their wholeness.
You've convinced me. I want to come. It sounds like to me, like this might sound a little bit controversial in person, but like when I practice yoga, and you have those times when I was younger, when I backpacked and didn't have much responsibility, I could get really deep in my practice to like next level depth and connection, and like I do struggle to get there now because I live in London, I'm self-employed, have adult stresses and like reality, and just in a busy city. Like I feel like I get so far into my practice, and then wherever I get stuck and there's just something that's not moving for me, I like to do like magic mushrooms.
Yeah.
And just or like a hallucinogen, and I'm like, okay, something's not opening up, something is not budging, it's not shifting, and if I have that little extra push of like a plant speaking to me and opening up some pathway that I wasn't able to open up with my yoga, meditation, and breathing practices, and be like, oh, okay, that's what that was. I felt that block, and now we can move past it and continue. So it's like, for me, that's where whenever I get a block, I do that. It sounds like...
I think with Ashtanga, I can't really speak to Vinyasa too much. I mean, I can speak to my experience of Vinyasa, but I can't speak from a teacher's perspective of Vinyasa. But with Ashtanga, there is definitely the scope within Ashtanga to both be, hugely transformational. For me, learning to stand up or do dropbacks and standing up from dropbacks healed trauma within me, or revealed trauma to me from childhood that maybe 10 years of talk therapy never did. Just kept me looping. Whereas with Ashtanga, within 6 months of learning to do that, I seen it, dealt with it, like, okay, now we know what we're moving. Now we know what we're dealing with. We can move forwards. For me, that was really powerful. The other side of Ashtanga is, though, staying looped. When you can't do something, Ashley is with me on this. She sees me every day in practice where we're getting stuck with something. And actually, unless there's someone in the room that's helping you break that asana down and get you out of the loop, the conversation in your head, or whatever your conversation is I'm not good enough, I'm never going to be good enough, I can't do this, I'm not strong enough, I'm not X, Y, and Z, can actually get perpetuated in that room, I found. And exactly that you can get, and then with our psychology, with the way the neurological pathways get laid down, is that groove just gets deeper and deeper until you take something that breaks it. And that's either breaking away from your asana practice, which I don't want to do. I never have one. I love my asana practice, and I know that it's good for me, but in the right context. So yes, for me, at one point, taking microdosing was the key. That's what shifted my asana practice totally as well, to get out of certain grooves. And I haven't microdosed since starting spinal.
Interesting.
Okay. And with microdosing, I would know, I did like 3 months on, with the program in there, like with 3 days on, 2 days off, 3 days on, 2 days off, and then shifting the schedule. But at some point I would come back to it, or I'd have a journey to have another shift. So I guess a journey of mushrooms or psychedelics or plant medicine could be the same could be based, put in parallel with spinal. I definitely remember when we were doing the training, we had a huge, what we call activation group session, so that we could all get to a certain state. And when you're doing it in a group session, we actually have a group session coming up. Group sessions are very powerful, actually. They're really powerful because you tap in, everyone's field comes into this sense of coherence. And if you're all working towards the greater good of each other, like the shift is incredible. There was massive releases and huge sessions of crying. Everyone was, going through a lot. And when we finished, that was the end of our morning session, and we were all off out for lunch, and we were all on the street looking at each other saying, we're not safe to be out. We shouldn't be out, all of us, because it was a really powerful session so that we could be activated to share this. But we all thought we shouldn't be out because it had that same potency as plant medicine.
Wow.
But a single session on a one-to-one won't have that. But it definitely has, and for me, it has a much longer lasting impact as well. As a practitioner, we should receive spinal every month at least, if not every other week. I feel I can go, and it may be because I teach Mysore, and I think Mysore, if you teach Mysore, you get a lot of energy back as a Mysore teacher. But I feel I can go maybe 2 or 3 months without a spinal session before I need my next one. But I would also like to explore having them more regularly. It's just a bit harder when you're, when you're actually giving it yourself, to get to other teachers so regularly. Yeah. Probably. But when I first had it, I had like 3 or 4 back to back plus 2 group sessions, and group sessions are really powerful.
It's almost like when you start teaching and then your practice sometimes is taken aback because you're just trying to focus so much on trying to teach and do things, and then your practice takes a hit, and then you're like, okay, I need to come back to it to a whole.
With spinal, and I was taught this, that you will go through an initiation period where you have it regularly to begin with, and you go and do the training, and or even if you don't do the training, just when you first start your journey with it, you have your 3 sessions and you're like, I feel amazing, I feel great. And then you'll overshoot, you'll go way beyond the time that you should have come back for your next session, because you need that time to integrate, exactly like it is with yoga, integrate what it is you've processed. Mm. And then from that place of, you gain a lot of wisdom in that integration, so that when you go way beyond it, you go, I should have come back then. I should have come back 2 months ago. And that's okay, because you've now learnt discernment. Mm. Right? You start to see your world with different eyes. You start to see it much less in a judgmental way or a way of blaming. You just say, this is what it is. And now I need my medicine. I'm going to go back and get the medicine that helps me live in this physical world. And so I think that's what's happened to me. I've probably, and I do that with yoga as well. I allow myself to really go for it and then recalibrate. But then as a teacher, now I've probably got to the stage where I'm really interested again in going like deep again, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, maybe back to back, because then it does take a while to integrate again.
It's like, I guess, we said as well that for example, meditation, that you can't I solved the problem, now it's going to be solved forever, so I don't have to. No, you have to keep meditating, because new things will come, or something will come back again, or so. I guess it's the same with the spinal as well. That it's not like you did 3 sessions and you're done and dusted for the rest of your life.
100%, Melinda. Life happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We're living life day in, day out. And life happens, and whether it's micro stresses of just constantly going through. I don't know, Linda, where you live. I think you're London-based. Are you as well? Life. We're all London-based teachers, and life in London is hectic. You don't find it stressful. There's a lot of micro stresses throughout the day, and that has an impact on our body, on our psychology, on our mental well-being. And unless we do take those breaks, it's going to have a negative impact. So when we have, you don't have to have a massive trauma to come to spinal energetics, and you don't also exactly have to keep experiencing, have 3 sessions and think that your life's fixed. Life will still happen. It's not a panacea, which I think, a lot of people come to yoga thinking it's going to be a panacea. I do yoga, life therefore is going to be amazing. That's the kicker, right? Life's always going to have its ups and downs. It's always going to be in cycles. But yeah, it can help us. But also what's also important that I've played with and experienced is it doesn't just help on a physical level. What I've seen with clients that have committed to coming regularly is their life externally turns into more of a magnetic field, and things that they wanted to attract into their life starts coming in without them having to reach out to bring it into their life. And that's what I'm starting to really be fascinated by is, how much does our field, the well-being of our field, we talk about mental well-being, physical well-being, but how about the well-being of our energetic field, the cohesion and the stability of our energetic field? How much impact does that have on creating our life. I think it's Rupert Sheldrake that talks about morphic resonance, and how the field around us is what attracts everything to us, as opposed to us creating our life just by going out and getting things. And that's something that I'm playing a lot with the clients that are coming very regularly, is what impact is that having on their work life. I mean, having clients who are, attracting jobs without them even going out to get it. They've thought about it, they want it, and it's starting to fall into place.
Wow, it's like manifestation work, like where I'm understanding this now, like when your energy is a bit dull, you're more withdrawn and you can get more down because nothing is coming your way, and you can get into that downward spiral of thinking and like not attracting things that you want, versus like when your energy is like in this expansion and flux and you're more of a pillar of strength of the people around you, you just attract things without trying.
First of all, I think you attract things, but also you become more resistant to things that are not good for you. You have better boundaries, for lack of, you might start off on a physical level of boundaries, but actually it becomes less sticky, for lack of a better word. But when you think of boundaries, I think of, I'm not going to go and hang out with this person. I'm not going to let this person treat me. It can be quite caustic if we think of the word boundary, but actually it can be quite soft. It can be quite soft as well. It can just be something that's like, that doesn't sit with me. So, and it doesn't sit with what I'm trying to create in my life. So I'm just not going to go there. Or even if I am there, it's not going to affect me because my field is so strong. And that's the place I think I'd love for people to get to, is to be in a place where your field is so strong that life around us it happens and we go, okay, we're going to have some spinal, or actually I'm good with this for 6 months, as a year, and then I might have a little top up.
The world needs more of this right now.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And it's just something that I feel so passionate about, because I've seen so many people who come, especially, when I first started doing it, when I was doing my assessments, you had to get people in to do case studies. And so I was dragging people in that had no idea what they were doing, or those that didn't want to do it at all. They were completely resistant. Remember when we were doing our teacher training, getting our friends in to do our classes. And so I had a lot of people that were resistant on the table, who wouldn't move, but were saying, oh, but I can feel some heat in the body. And, oh, I felt inside me a lot more peace, or I felt waves inside me. And now they're starting to really feel connected to themselves again. And that's where I get a lot of joy, seeing people who, like you say, actually, literally dead or disconnected from the neck down, starting to remember, oh, I have some limbs, have some organs. Those nerves are starting to wake up. Sometimes you'll see clients, their hands are moving on the bed, and then afterwards I'll say to them, so your hand was moving, and they'll say to me, was it? I had no idea, I didn't feel it. But again, that's the sign of the innate wisdom starting to come back to the level of connectivity to the body, that says that we were completely disconnected from it.
And when we're disconnected, we feel disconnected from not only ourselves, from everybody, and living in isolation and anxiety and stress and fear and competitiveness and jealousy and all these things. And it's that connection of like everything you need is already within you.
And if we are disconnected from ourselves, we're disconnected from nature, we're disconnected from our homes, we're disconnected from the cycles of life. Again, that comes back to us being disconnected from ourselves, because we're all of that.
Yeah.
We're not separate from nature. We're not separate from the powers that are around us that create the seasons. It's that same innate wisdom that creates the seasons, that creates the weather. It keeps our heart beating. And the more we think that we're separate from that, I'm probably preaching to the choir, because most yogis feel that connection to nature and her cycles. But the more we come back to that, the more in alignment we can live our dharma, what we're here to really express, from the divine. The more that we live in tune with that, then we create more harmony across the world. We don't even have to go out and be activists and do things for creating change so much. We create that activation from within ourselves.
Yeah.
And that resonates outwards. But, it's a new modality in the sense that it's a new modality, but based on very old techniques as well. You know, it blends Eastern and Western techniques, but it's new in that people, I think, for the first time, are seeing that this freedom to move on a bed like that in a way that they probably never felt free to move. And in fact, I find that a lot of yogis, when they come for sessions, they don't feel that free to move, especially, which is quite interesting. How much does yoga asana classes tell us just to move in a certain way? Therefore, we feel like we shouldn't move on a bed as well. I don't know, playing with that a little bit. I mean, I move a lot. I'm like move so much when I'm on having sessions, but not everyone does. And the movement is only a sign of sense of freedom in the spine. But what we're looking for is connection, is how connected you are internally. And that can be a change in your breath. That can be a change in the way you're sort of just moving through your shoulders or your hands, or it could be just, you know, not having your eyes darting so much afterwards, you know, that your nervous system has really tempered itself down and that you're able to be a bit more present. But I think people either love it or are afraid of it when they first see it, really. And they're either freaked out by it, thinking this isn't normal and isn't natural, when really that's just our conditioning, that we've been made to believe that movement like that is not natural when it really is. Or it speaks to you really, really loudly, and you think, yes, I'm going to come for it. But really, the only way to articulate what it is to feel it.
Mm.
How do people get in contact with you to
my email is yogawithzeena@gmail.com. It's on my Instagram, so you can get it on there. My handle is Zeena Kali Yoga on Instagram. And you can just DM me and we'll book a slot in. And we can do it online also. So again, weirdly, we think it wouldn't work, but energy's energy. So we know that we don't have, we can connect to the field from anywhere, really. So we can actually do this from remote sessions as well.
Cool.
Oh, yeah, we're going to put this in the show notes as well so people can find you easily. And thank you for opening up a new world to in front of us, because I never I've seen it in shows, and then
cool.
And I was thinking, what the hell is happening there? Especially with my partner, who's not really a yogi. He's like, what the hell are they doing? And he just find it funny. Not even it's this is just bullshit, as you were just saying. Sorry for saying it, but yeah. So it's good to open up people's eyes to new things and new ways of working through trauma, or things that you might not be conscious of, and just be conscious of it later.
There's so much science behind it. It starts off, if you like I said, Waking the Tiger is, I think Peter Levine is the author. I can't remember the author's name, but Waking the Tiger is one of the first books on trauma of our modern day society, anyway. That in terms of then that led on to The Body Keeps the Score, and When the Body Says No, so work by Dr. Gabor Mate. And there's no two ways about it that our bodies and their manifestation of disease is intrinsically linked to what our experiences are in life. They aren't the only reason, they aren't the only cause, but more and more data is coming out to show, especially things like cancer or inflammation or sort of autoimmune conditions that when I was studying would always be said to be iatrogenic. We have no known cause for them, they just happen. They don't just happen, there is something behind it. Otherwise, if there wasn't something behind it, would be in perfect health. And we'd be, we wouldn't need to have intervention. But that sense of disease does happen, or dis-ease does happen. And actually, the human body knows exactly what it needs to do to heal if it's given the right space.
Yep.
And also, Dr. Joe Dispenza is another person. If you two, I think, Ashley, you've studied with Dr. Joe, have you? No. Dr. Joe Dispenza is another amazing teacher who uses Vedic-based meditations and breath work with Bandha to help create altered states of mind. And huge stories of transformation coming through him as well. So the more you look into it, you'll start to see that this work is although it seems on the surface is new, is actually really ancient in its roots, and also very much the the true sort of wisdom of the body just coming to the surface again in response to it having been suppressed. I think the term esoteric, when you were talking, Melinda, about meditating, and Ashley, you were saying about the different states we experience through our meditation. That term was those states were termed as esoteric. Dare I say, through colonialists, and it's that diminishing of what was a really strong and beneficial practice or group of practices by people who didn't understand it is what we'll continue to see with things as they come on board. That's almost at a juxtaposition to modern medicine, because it does question, do you need to take a pharmaceutical for something that might be, might have something else, that could be used to help, not necessarily treat something, but help resolve, issues like inflammation. And I think that's where we face the biggest sort of challenges and naysayers, is where people have an interest in keeping certain structures upheld.
Yeah, that. Thank you, Zeena, for coming on here.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Is there anything else you wanted to share before we sign off here?
No, I think we've covered a lot today, which is a beautiful conversation. Lovely to explore so many topics. It's always nice to connect and have some yogi time with fellow yogis.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing all this with us. And
thanks for listening, everyone.